The Australian Financial Review.
Welcome to The Fin Election 2025. I'm Jessica Gardner with political editor Phillip Coorey, economics editor John Kehoe and senior writer and former Rewindow editor Myriam Robin.
Well, this is the sweetest victory of all.
It's Tuesday, April 15.
I have always believed in miracles.
Who do you trust to keep the economy strong? Who do you trust to keep interest rates low?
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
The light on the hill.
Set it aflame again. Tonight, the Australian people have voted for change.
Firstly, welcome Phil, John and Myriam to the podcast.
Thanks, Jess.
G'day.
Thanks for having us.
As I mentioned, my name's Jess Gardner. I'm deputy editor here at the Financial Review, stepping in this week for Lisa Murray. As we head towards the May 3 election, the Fin podcast has gathered a panel of the Financial Review's finest political minds to take you inside the campaign and break down the big issues for voters. So, Phil, as the paper's political editor, I'll ask you to get us rolling. So, on the weekend, we had both sides doing their formal campaign launches, Labor in Perth and the Coalition in Western Sydney, where you were. Take us through what was announced by either side and your take on what it tells us about where the campaign is up to.
Well, we're just approaching the midpoint of the campaign, Jess, and it's about to shut down completely for Easter, and both major parties are acutely aware that the public will pay not one jot of attention from about Thursday afternoon onwards, possibly until the following weekend, because we've got Anzac Day as well. So from the outset, as soon as Albanese announced the date, they were operating on the assumption this would be a dumbbell-shaped campaign. So what we saw on the weekend, the dumbbell being the big depression in the middle, what we saw on the weekend, especially from the Coalition, was basically throwing everything they've got left out there in a bid to get noticed and get some traction before everyone shuts off for Easter, because don't forget, pre-poll voting starts on Tuesday next week. So it's really these are the last throws of the dice, if you like, before people actually start voting. We saw from Albanese a tax policy and a housing policy. The housing policy extended a Morrison government scheme which would enable home buyers to get into the market with a 5% deposit. And he rebirthed an old policy that Labor abolished back when they were last in government about the standard $1,000 per year work-related expenses when you're doing your tax return. Dutton sort of went more nuclear. He'd already announced previously the halving of fuel excise for a year worth $6 billion. He added another $10 billion in short-term relief by bringing back, again for 1 year, a low-income tax offset based on the one the Morrison government ran for a few years. This one's called the cost of living tax offset, but it's pretty much the same mechanism, and that means at the end of the financial year 25-26, everyone earning up to $144,000 gets up to $1,200 rebate. So both did tax, both did housing, and what is questionable whether anyone heard any of it.
Yeah, exactly. Last week on the podcast, Phil, you were really dumbfounded by both parties having their launch on the Sunday together. Do you think your warning about Dutton not finding clear air for his message has come true? Yeah,
I do, and I think it's not my view. I think it's the general view. Labor couldn't quite believe their luck because they had announced first the timing of their launch, which was Sunday. Now, both parties were limited because of Easter and Anzac Day. The ideal time to do the launches is 2 weeks out, so it would have been over this weekend if they had their druthers. But the fact the Coalition chose to do it on the same day, exactly what we thought would happen, did happen, and that's that they both neutralised each other. And the story on Sunday was not Peter Dutton doing something on housing or Peter Dutton doing something on taxes. It was both parties were spending madly. I think it was a draw in terms of the politics of it, and every day there's a draw, it's a loss for Dutton because he is behind and he's getting further behind.
John, I think one result of having the launches on the same day was that the size of the competing tax and housing policies was very hard to ignore. You interviewed a number of economists on Sunday about this. What are their main concerns about the promises being made this election?
Well, we saw about $24 billion worth of combined announcements on Sunday from Labor and the Coalition. We've seen about $105 billion or so during this campaign, or since late last year, actually. Now, Labor has spent more, roughly about double, actually, but the Coalition has matched a lot of the spending as well. I think the concern is, where is the money coming from? How is this being paid for? Basically, the budget's already facing nearly $1 trillion of debt in the next 6 to 12 months. It's also facing a decade of deficit. So there's just the cost of these policies, but then there's actually the economic principles of them too. And I've got to say, on both sides, they're both very poorly designed, diabolical, really. Look, let's start with Labor. I actually think Labor's policies on housing and tax are less bad than the Coalition's at the margin. I mean, $1,000 standard tax deduction, it's not a bad thing. It was recommended by Henry Tax Review. Cutting the marginal tax rate from 16 to 14%, at least that has some sort of economic work incentive for people to work more who are part-time or welfare to work workers. But the Coalition, I mean, what they've proposed is quite diabolical in economic policy terms. A $1,200 rebate, the old Lamito, just a cash handout to people at the end of the year, does nothing to increase work incentives. It's just a cash splash. It's basically a bribe. And look, this mortgage deductibility for first home buyers buying new homes, there's been a rumour going around about this for the past week or so. To be honest, I was dismissive because I thought they're not going to do that. That's crazy stuff. And sure enough, they've gotten so desperate slipping behind in the polls, they've gone there. And it just defies credibility. And I think Peter Dutton is proving that he's a bit of an economic populist. And, there's probably others in the Coalition who are driving this too. Michael Sukkar as well, I suspect, on the housing stuff.
Although the housing policy was one of the few they've announced this campaign that has been thought through and planned for some time. It wasn't pulled out of the hat like the tax cut. I mean, I think the whole tragedy of this campaign from the budget perspective is that you've had one side, the Labor side, spend a lot of money on the cost of living, and it hasn't been a problem for them, even though they've run the budget into deficit, further into deficit and debt, because people don't care about it like they used to. And then you had the other side, which began the year saying, we're going to campaign on fixing the budget. And Peter Dutton was very firm in January saying, we're going to have to, he used the words, economic surgery. We've got to get rid of these sugar hits, or Panadol measures, as he called them. We've got to stop adding to the problem. We've got to fix it at the base. Now, if you're going to make a virtue of budget repair, you've got to make a virtue of budget repair. But what they realised over the next 6 weeks is no one was going to vote for you for being economically responsible. And their MPs were telling him, mate, Labor's handing them all this stuff, and the voters come to me and say, we don't like our bow, but what are you going to do? What are you going to give us? And they didn't have any answers. We're going to fix the budget. Well, that doesn't feed the bulldog when people are struggling out there. So what we've seen is this latent correction, if you like, with these short-term populist measures, the fuel excise discount and the tax cut John was just talking about. At least, at a minimum in terms of budget responsibility, they're one-offs. They're only run for a year. They're not recurrent, so that you can contain the cost of them. But it really is a consequence of the politics, right? They've failed to make a virtue out of repairing the budget. COVID unleashed the law of the jungle in terms of what people think of debt and deficit. They don't care anymore. They just want the government to pay for everything. I mean, that debate last week, whenever it was, between Albanese and Dutton, where everyone in that room had their hand out and not one person asked, how are we paying for this? And that's, we've said before, there will be a reckoning, but we've even seen the Coalition succumb to that populism, but whilst at the same time saying they're going to, they'll still have better set of numbers than Labor.
I guess the issue around the budget and a lot of these measures are time limited. The one that's really worrying, I do think, is the mortgage tax deductibility. That's the kind of thing I think where it will really very quickly become baked into people's budgets if it does pass. And I just don't see how that kind of thing ever gets wound back easily. We've seen with negative gearing, tax deductibility and stuff, just how hard it is to actually bring these things back, even if there's a consensus that they're not suitable going forward.
And so, John, taking a look at those housing measures, as Myriam has discussed, what's your take on whether they will help solve the affordability crisis or just push prices up further?
I think the consensus among economists, housing experts, tax experts is that these, at the margin, will add more demand to the housing market because they'll increase the amount of money people can borrow, whether it's the tax deductibility on the Coalition side or having a government-backed lender's mortgage insurance with a lower deposit of as little as 5% on the Labor side. That's going to add a little bit more demand to the market, probably push up debt levels a bit, so increase a little bit of risk in the system and to individual borrowers and lead to slightly higher prices. How much is very hard to know, but we saw during the home builder stimulus during COVID that really was taken up a lot more than Treasury estimated. And you've got economists like Peter Downs saying this tax break or tax deductibility for mortgage interest is like home builder on steroids, and it could cost billions of dollars more. Probably not great for the housing market. Look, both sides claim that, hang on, there's supply side policies in here to match this or do some more building of homes. The coalition points to, well, our thing is skewed towards new homes, new apartments, new houses. Labor says we're pouring $10 billion into building 100,000 homes exclusively for first home buyers over the next 8 years. Okay, that sounds great. But what's constraining supply in the market is a whole lot of other things at the moment. Zoning, planning red tape, NIMBYism, high construction costs, state government taxes, a bunch of other things. And these policies aren't really addressing that. So what they're doing, they're pouring more demand into a supply-constrained market. And what happens there? The price goes up. They're not really dealing with the supply issue. They'd be better off actually just doing nothing and staying out of the way.
Yeah, interesting point, although probably doing nothing is a hard sell in an election campaign. Myriam, you've been on the ground in Melbourne talking to voters about what they want in the seat of Kooyong. So this is where former Morrison government treasurer Josh Frydenberg was the member until he lost the seat to Teal Monique Ryan at the last election. It is one of the seats that the coalition would hope to win back. Can you tell us how the issue of housing plays out in Kooyong?
Yeah, so I think so just for listeners to understand, Kooyong, it's an electorate quite close to the city. It's quite an old electorate. It's very wealthy. And it sort of splits between mansions, basically, and then developed units, apartments, all of that. So it has kind of, gone dumbbellish, I guess, in terms of you do have all of these young professionals who want to live near the city, and then just these very established, wealthy estates. And I guess the way the issue of housing has played out there is actually really interesting because one of the candidates, Amelia Hamer for the Liberals, had presented herself as a renter. And it turns out she owns 2 investment properties that she had picked up while working in London and Canberra. Now, generally, if you're a politician and you want to run for an electorate, you've been in a few places in the intervening years. What you'll do is you'll buy and you'll say, I'm committed to this electorate. This is my neighbourhood. But clearly, Amelia figured, well, I actually have more electoral advantage presenting myself as a renter, as one of the young people. Now, maybe she can do that because she's a Liberal and she's going to get all of the land-owning classes anyway. But I thought it was quite an interesting inversion of the general logic about these things. And I guess it speaks to the changing politics of this issue and just that there's so many renters, even somewhere like Kooyong, who would probably feel better voting for another renter.
Yeah, so we've got the dumbbell electorate in the dumbbell election.
Lots of dumb policies too.
Hey, Myriam, given you're sort of hip to the beat in Kooyong, what effect do you think, if any, Monique Ryan's slip up on the weekend will have? Where she didn't have an answer whether she thought it was wrong or right to pay influencers to praise you and not declare that they're being paid. Do you think people are so in love with her they'll look through that, or that may have an effect?
I mean, I think it wasn't great. I mean, it probably speaks to her innate combativeness, I think. I think the question had a really obvious answer, which is I support electoral laws, but she sort of was so kind of not willing to attack a fellow Teal that she wasn't willing to go there. So I think it speaks to her political weakness, certainly, and I think she probably has turned off some people in her electorate over the years by that kind of combativeness. But I don't think the insiders thing in and of itself really made that much of an impact.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Myriam. Do you think that this revelation about her 2 investment properties has harmed her chances in Kooyong?
I think it's quite hard to tell how this will affect her chances right now. I think the last polling in the seat was done before that issue came about, also before Monique Ryan's husband removed a sign from a private fence. So it's not really clear how either of those 2 things have played out. But I think just in my own talking to people, I've noticed a bit of a generational gulf in how this is seen. I think the people that she was trying to win over by claiming to be a renter are probably a little bit annoyed, and maybe older Australians with investment properties think it's really off to have a go at someone for having investment properties, and it's made them more pro-harmers. So it's I would love to see extra polling. It is a very, very tight seat, and that makes the campaign particularly hard fought and bitter, and I guess we'll find out on election night.
Phil, what about you? What are the Teal seats that are currently held, or the Liberal seats at risk from a Teal win this election that you've got your eye on?
Well, the two current teal seats that everyone is watching are Zoe Daniels' seat of Goldstein in Melbourne and Kate Cheney's seat of Curtin in WA. They've long been deemed the two most vulnerable. I don't think anyone's really expecting, apart from the possible exception of Kooyong, any of the others to change hands. Allegra Spenders seems pretty comfortable in Wentworth, and Sophie Scomps up in Mackellar, and of course North Sydney got abolished, so Kylie Tink doesn't have a seat. So yeah, Goldstein, I saw some polling on that a couple of weeks ago by John Scales. He's a very good seat poller. He uses candidate recognition. Daniel's vote primary was down to 24. If that hasn't picked up markedly by polling day, she will be in deep stum. I think I hear Curtin's on the line. The only thing it may save Kate Cheney is the Liberal Party still really unpopular in Perth, federally and state. As for what else might fall, I think Bradfield, obviously, which is now ex-Paul Fletcher seat up in North Sydney, now being run by Giselle Kapterian, who's the Liberal candidate. But Nicola Buller is, she's got good name recognition up there. This is her second crack at the seat. She's got a ton of money behind her. All you need is a good candidate and a ton of money, and you can be a threat. Malcolm Fraser's old seat of Wannon in Victoria, now held by Dan Tien. Alex Dyson's having a second crack at that one. And it's sort of interesting, if they were to lose that, they've now lost, the Liberal Party has lost nearly every seat held by former treasurers and prime ministers. Bennelong's now in Labor hands. Higgins that was Costello's old seat. That went to Labor's, now been abolished. Kooyong's gone. North Sydney's gone. Warringah, which is Tony Abbott's old seat. I don't think they've got any of their blue ribbon seats that were held by their leaders except Wannon.
And Dutton's policies really aren't appealing so much to those sort of tealish kind of electorates either. He's going more for the outer suburban regional vote. Things like a fuel excise tax cut, abolishing emission vehicle standards as well for new vehicles. So he seems to be targeting those seats. And I'm not saying the Liberals are completely given up on the teal seats, because they do need to get some of them if they're ever going to be back in government. But the policies aren't really angled towards that at the moment.
Okay, well, we'll be back after the break to take our weekly look at the polls, take a listener question about tax reform, and find out what our panel are focused on in the coming campaign week. Welcome back to the Fin Election 2025. I'm Jessica Gardner, and I'm talking with political editor Phil Coorey, economics editor John Kehoe, and senior writer Myriam Robin about the election to be held on May 3. We've covered the campaign launches and had a look at how housing and budget management have become prominent issues in the campaign. So, Phil, what are the polls saying at the moment?
The polls are saying at the moment, Jessica, that Albanese has the momentum that started to build behind him just before he called the election has continued to build, and the two most likely options on May 3rd, as of the current poll status of the polls, is a Labor majority or a Labor minority. I think the prospect of a Liberal minority is just non-existent, and it's now a very long shot for Peter Dutton to be able to even get enough seats to form a minority.
And as a little sneak peek, we can reveal we'll have a new Financial Review Freshwater Strategy poll out on Thursday morning, so stay tuned. Yeah,
or Wednesday night, whenever we publish it. But yeah, we've seen news poll over the weekend has the Libs behind 52-48, and basically the numbers are as they were at the last election. So that's why I think now the majority government's back in play. We saw a Resolve poll today trending the same way. I suspect we'll be in the same patch, but we'll wait and see.
We'll turn now to a listener question. And I should say, if anyone wants to send in a question, please email thefin@afr.com. This week, our smart listeners have really coalesced around a couple of very strong themes. We had a lot of questions asking, well, if the parties are serious about housing affordability, then why not consider abolishing negative gearing or the capital gains tax discounts? But then that parlayed into a much bigger picture set of questions about why politicians are just tinkering around the edges with their housing and tax policies. And I think Peter from the ACT has summarised it best. He asks, what event, circumstance, disaster or epiphany will in your eyes lead to the major parties committing to long overdue tax reform? John, you follow the Treasurers closely in your role, and they are often the champions of tax policy within parties. What can you say about their appetite for bold policies that we need to solve the big problems the country is facing?
Well, I think Jim Chalmers has made it pretty clear he's not up for big, bold tax reform. He's talked about doing changes in bite-sized chunks, such as things they've done in their first term, tinkering with the petroleum resource rent tax for offshore gas projects, changing the stage 3 tax cuts that he inherited from the coalition, the latest little round of income tax trims. He did some things around off-market share buybacks for franking credits and things like that at the margin. So I think it's pretty clear he's not going to do anything big and bold. He might keep tinkering. That's probably he's had a look at negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount. He's had Treasury advice on that privately. We know that. Could that come back onto the agenda in a second term? I wouldn't entirely rule it out, to be honest, particularly if there's a minority government with Teals and Greens sort of putting pressure on the government to do things. I think personally he'd probably like to, is my gut feel. On the coalition side, we honestly don't know what Angus Taylor's ambition is for tax reform and whether Peter Dutton would even let him do anything if Taylor was interested. But you've got to take them on face value of their policies that they've rolled out. Now, they're saying they're doing these one-off sort of petrol excise cuts, $1,200 tax offset, one-off, these sorts of things. That's not tax reform. That's just throwing more taxpayers' money back and being funded by debt. So I don't see any signs from it, but it is hard to do from opposition, tax reform. So I do always think it's more difficult to do from opposition. We saw that with Bill Shorten in 2019. We saw that with John Hewson in 1993. But you want to see some sort of framework or commitment to actually have a look at this. And I don't think we're really seeing clear evidence of that from either side at the moment.
It shortens the obviously historical point to bring up. And Phil, tax reform is hard at the best of times. Why is it especially hard to sell in an election campaign?
Oh, just because of the increasingly idiotic nature of politics, Jess. I mean, I love these people calling for negative gearing and capital gains tax. Did they vote Labor in 2016 and 2019 when Labor tried to reform both those taxes? I mean, Labor's had its arse handed to it on a plate in 2 elections on those 2 issues. It's become like their work choices, and you wonder why they're reluctant to go back there. Even though, as Peter from the ACT asked, what disaster or epiphany? Well, I think we are now at that epiphany moment where if you can't make a case for it now, you're never going to be able to. I don't agree on negative gearing. I don't think that's the problem. But the CGT deduction is generally recognised as the villain in terms of fueling house prices. I think you can limit the number of properties people can negatively gear, but if you get rid of it altogether, you're going to have no rental properties. The other thing is just, we've been talking in this podcast about influencers and stuff like that. I mean, the dumbing down of politics in this election has taken a quantum leap. Now, we're now speaking in TikTok slogans. I mean, how on earth are you going to engage people in any sort of... I mean, imagine Paul Keating did everything he did in this era. He wouldn't have lasted a day. Imagine trying to deregulate the banks, float the dollar, abolish tariffs, and you had some knucklehead going on TikTok, with a dancing bear or something, and getting the kids angry. And I was looking at this, this alleged debate last night between the treasurers on the 7:30 report. Now, I'm not picking sides here, but I know the Labor tactic is when they have these debates is to get the lines out. It's not to actually sort of say anything meaningful. It's to make sure you land the lines, right? So they've got these pre-scripted lines. And Jim Chalmers last night saying, you're going to cut Medicare to pay for your $600 billion in nuclear reactors. Now, that's rubbish, right? They're not. The nuclear reactors aren't $600 billion. They're half that, and they're going to borrow that money, right? And they're not going to cut anything to pay for it. But the line works really well. And within an hour of that debate last night, they were running memes of Jim landing the lines. That the whole thing was he used pre-coached lines so they could run memes on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and everything else. That's what you're dealing with now, politics. You imagine if Angus Taylor last night had said, yes, we're going to reform the tax system. We're going to have to increase the GST, lower company tax, lower income taxes. Do you reckon we all would have written up today, brave opposition, tackles difficult subject? It would have been Taylor to shove up GST. They would have gone down 10 points in news poll. I don't think the public allows. They talk about it, but they don't want them to do it. And the idiocy of social media now, I think, has just made it impossible.
I mean, I saw a front bencher speak at a Chatham House event very recently from one of the major parties, and they spoke about how you've got to get your message out within 7 seconds because of the cold TikTok, Instagram thing, and even when you're talking to voters on the ground in marginal electorates as well. So that doesn't lend itself to a serious conversation. It's a sort of rinse and repeat the message. That's the message from the major parties to their candidates on the ground. I would just say on tax, the one thing is that Labor mucked up in 2019 and 2016, and Bill Kelty and even Shorten now has admitted this as well. They raised all this revenue theoretically from capital gains tax, dividend imputation, trusts and things like that, but they didn't put that money to reducing income tax. Now, that is the opportunity for a party. We're talking about bracket creep. We're talking about the intergenerational unfairness that more income tax is going to be faced by a shrinking share of the younger population to fund older people. Now, you've got to be careful not to get into an intergenerational war here, but there is a really strong political and policy case to raise some more revenue elsewhere, but to cut income tax. That has to be the trade-off.
Well, it has to be, and it always is. And Morrison and Turnbull were the last ones to have a serious look at this. But there wasn't enough money in the budget to cover all the compensation. It's not just cutting income tax. You've got to lift welfare like Howard did in 2000. And as the Liberals are saying now, whether you believe them or not, they'll have a look at it, but the budget's got to be fixed first. And we're a long way from fixing the budget, and therefore I think we're a long way from doing serious tax reform. The only way it will work is if it's bipartisan. And it's a bit like a referendum. It's not going. If both parties come to the realisation the economy's stuffed, the tax system is stuffed, and they mutually agree to do this, with the support of third parties. But, the temptation to land a smart-ass comment on TikTok, I think every time will outweigh that.
Well, I think it sounds like what's actually needed is bipartisanship and a big, long discussion with the electorate and a 7-second slogan on TikTok.
Exactly.
Get all those three together.
Reform is good, Daddy.
We might have reform.
Yeah. Good luck with the bipartisanship. But I also think it's going to take It's going to take a unique political leader that we've seen in previous generations. It is harder these days. Paul Keating, Peter Costello are very good advocates. We occasionally see it at the state level with people. We just need that person to take the leap of faith. Unfortunately, we've got too many career politicians who are just trying to hang around in their careers in Parliament and get to the top jobs.
We need a kamikaze government, just someone to come in and not care whether they get re-elected.
On that positive and constructive note, let's turn to the coming week.
Yeah.
And look, I know it's a 24/7 campaign, but Phil, we're about to head into back-to-back long weekends for Easter and Anzac Day. You touched on it at the beginning, but say a bit more about what you actually think it means for the campaign and how they maintain their message and momentum over this period.
Well, it means that if you haven't got your message out by tomorrow or Thursday, that's your last chance. It's too late after that because, as we said, voting begins on Tuesday next week, straight after the Easter break. And then, but what really happens, Jess, we've had the last three elections now have had Easter in the middle, and there's a complete ceasefire from sort of Thursday night through to Monday morning, and both. It's the last chance people have for the year to have a proper break before the real drudgery of winter and everything comes along. No one will be paying any attention over Easter. Not only that, it's a very meaningful religious occasion for a lot of people. So it would be impolitic to campaign anyway on Good Friday, things like that. There'll be a few Easter messages from each of the leaders, and they'll probably go to a church or something like that. But this is in Albanese's favour. I must say they are absolutely relishing the prospect of where they are sitting in the polls right now. They go into Easter with a lead. Dutton will lose an entire week. He will basically lose an entire week from Friday through to Saturday week because most people are going to take all the next week off anyhow. It's school holidays on top of it all. So it's a dead zone, and it favours the incumbent if the incumbent is ahead.
And Myriam, what are you looking out for in the coming weeks?
I'm really curious about what impact these housing policies from both major parties have on their polling. So I think, as we've heard from John, most economists are pretty sceptical about both of them, maybe a bit more sceptical about the Liberal policies. I would have thought that out there, outside economist land or financial review land, maybe these things would have been taken a bit better. But I follow a lot of financial influencers on social media, and a lot of them are pretty scathing about these as well. So I was a little bit surprised by that, and I wonder if maybe some of the people who these policies are meant to attract are getting a little bit savvier about these things. So I'm not sure what impact it'll have, but it might be surprising.
Yeah, and interesting that the financial influencers are taking a sceptical eye to policy, because the criticism laid at their feet when it turned out they were here at the budget is that they would just swallow the talking points whole.
Yeah. So, maybe they're more sophisticated than given credit for.
And John, what about you? We've had 2 Treasurer debates already. I can't imagine you're looking forward to the next one, given your comments earlier. What are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to this election being over, if I'm being really frank. But hopefully we've seen the height of stupidity and bad policy so far at the election launches. And from here on, there's not going to be more announcements. I mean, the sort of least damage, do nothing. Hopefully it's just them prosecuting the policies they've already unveiled rather than getting a bunch of other ones as well, to be quite frank with you.
Well, we are expecting one more announcement from Dutton, this big defence spending announcement. We'll see what that is, and maybe from your point of view, feel he's left that a little bit too late.
Maybe not. I guess he's got to have one more thing to say, but for me, the most important thing between now and polling day is the costings. So, I mean, it used to matter. Whether it matters this time, I'm not sure, but that's usually the last week of the campaign. Both sides release their costings. Now, Labor, Chalmers confirmed last night they've spent a little bit more since the budget, but not much. So we're not expecting much change to their bottom line. But I think the Libs are going to try and come in with a significantly better bottom line, because a lot of the stuff they've only promised to spend half as much as Labor, and most of it's only for a year anyway. So they will try and make a big virtue of budget repair in the last week.
Well, thank you, Myriam and John, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Happy Easter.
Now, Phil, every episode we ask you to reveal your favourite quote or moment of the week. What do you have for us this week?
Well, my runner-up, Jess, is Monique Ryan on Insider saying, "I don't have an opinion on it," when asked whether she thought it was, right or wrong for influencers to be paid to, peddle opinion, and for that person who's paying them not to declare that. I thought, the Teal's campaign on being better than everyone else and a certain level of sanctimony, and I think that burst that bubble. But the winner this week I give to Jacinta Price, the National Senator and rising star, who in Perth on Saturday, they wheeled her out as the break glass option because she's very popular.
I'm so proud to be able to stand beside...
She gave a little spiel standing alongside Peter Dutton in which he said, "Let's make Australia great again. Let's get Australia back on track."
Make Australia great again, that we can bring Australia back to its former...
This is despite many warnings, both public and privately. They've got to stop channeling Donald Trump because he's killing their campaign. And when this was put to the good Senator Price at the subsequent press conference, she said, "I didn't even realise I said that."
If I said that, I don't even realise I said that, but no, I'm an Australian and I want to ensure that we get Australia back on track.
Thank you for joining us for the Finn Election 2025. I'm Jessica Gardner with Phil Coorey, John Kehoe and Myriam Robin reporting today. The Finn Election 2025 is produced by Lap Fan and Alex Gow, with thanks to Zach De Silva. Our theme is by Alex Gow. Lap Fan is head of podcast. Fiona Buffini is head of premium content. If you like the show and want to hear more, follow us wherever you get your podcasts and consider rating and reviewing us, as it helps others find us. For more stories about markets, business and power, subscribe to the Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. Our regular programme of The Fin drops on Thursday, where we dive into Donald Trump's tariffs, Liberation Day, and how it upended everything we thought we knew about financial markets. Bye for now.
The Australian Financial Review.